Welcome, everybody, back to Englebrook Independent Political Views. I'm your host, Ryan, and with me, as always, is the executive editor, Art.
Good evening, everybody. How are you?
And tonight, we've got a few things we want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into. So, this is going to be a little longer than our usual form with the rundowns. But if you've been with us before, then you've seen this format. You know exactly what to expect. So, Art, what is the main topic on your mind tonight that you want to talk about?
Is the crime surge that's going, the crime crisis that's going across the country, in Democratic cities, also Republican cities, basically red state, blue state crime that's going across the nation.
All right,
And
so what? Go. I'm
and
sorry, I cut you off there.
yeah, I know. And
Um,
it's okay. And basically, with Trump wanting to call National Guard troops in, and governors saying no. So that's where we're based. That's what I'm basically wanting to talk about tonight.
All right, well, let's start with the statistics, because I have found kind of a problem with the statistics is that you can kind of cherry pick the data and get whatever crime stats you want. So, for example, you can look at national statistics and it says violent crimes have gone down since 2023, up to 40% in some cases. But that I found is not always the case because of differences in the way that crimes are reported and also differences in how crimes are categorized by who's doing the reporting. So you may, for instance, have an NGO that considers theft of anything over $100, a major theft, whereas another one is going to mark it at $1,000 or more.
Correct.
Have you come across the same issues in your
Well,
research?
basically, the crime stats vary. First of all, crime has gone down from the all-time high during the pandemic. Okay. But crime spiked during the pandemic from 2020 through 2021. It jumped. Now it's gone down. But there's also been a lot of reporting. Like if you get FBI statistics across the country, they classify homicides with guns, homicides with knives, homicides, manual homicide. Everything is classified different. A lot of times they're downgrading charges, like you said, which throws the statistics off 100%. I mean, I'm looking at, for example, I'm looking at Washington, D.C. The crime spiked horrendously during the pandemic and then did drop down, but you were still averaging basically two to four, sometimes five homicides a week. And
Okay.
now since Trump, took over President Trump put in the troops and all the federal law enforcement agencies in there. Since he did that, there's only been two homicides.
So one of the
State,
questions I have about that is, have the troops been deployed to areas where there's high violence or just areas where it's high visibility? Do we know if there's been any
they're
active?
they're they're sitting in there. They're in areas where, I mean, they're not basically combating crime. They're just standing there. Okay. They're positioned on street corners. They're positioned different locations and high crime areas, low crime areas. I mean, the two areas still have not, they've combated crime in DC, but not to the fullest. There's still some minor crime going on in that, and I think I forget which ward it is, but um, it's the Anacostia section and that where there's still some crime there, but not what it was. So, I mean, it's very confusing because the crime statistics are all over the place. And I mean, there was a captain from DC that was suspended because he was doctoring the numbers, and he was suspended prior to Trump, going in and taking over Washington, D.C. So,
Another thing that occurred to me is if the National Guard themselves are not forming what would you call that, law enforcement activities, but rather they're just kind of like a deterrent. Is it possible that we might be seeing a dip in crime for now until criminals adjust or until the heat's off of them and then it just comes right back to where it was
no,
before?
I really don't know. I don't think so because now Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., who first supported Trump when it first happened, then a couple days later said she didn't,
Yeah.
now just, I think, signed an executive order yesterday continuing the presence of in Washington, D.C.
Could that be the result of political pressure, though? Do we know what's going on? Is there any indication behind the scenes whether
I don't see
she's
any indication behind the scenes. I mean, she was the one that didn't want to bring National Guard troops into Washington during January 6th. She sees the thing. I mean, crime overall is down. The statistics are saying around 87.5% the past 24, 25 days. Okay.
okay?
You look at it, it's probably anywhere between 76 and 82% that it's actually down. Based on what I'm getting from, DC Metropolitan Police and other, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, which, I can say. But I mean, it's substantially dropped. But they've always said it dropped, but it was at an all-time high during the pandemic. I don't want to keep
Yeah.
repeating myself,
Well, there
but
was a spike in 2023 as well in a number of cities.
yeah, yeah. But that's where you have, that's where you have a lot of discrepancies because you have governors in, some of these states that are saying, for example, Illinois, our crime is down. It's down, yeah, but it's spiked horrendously during the pandemic. I mean, Chicago is out of control. It's been out of
Yeah.
control. I mean, the numbers came in that they reported basically this past weekend that 58 people were shot, eight were killed over the Labor Day weekend, when actually it's about 69 that were shot and 11 people killed in
So
the
what's the discrepancy there? Is that police shootings included or not included?
It's they just, people succumb to their injuries at the hospital. They're not reported right away, but if you research all the area hospitals,
Okay.
you can find out who's in there for shootings, and that type of stuff. I mean, I have an in to get in with certain areas where a lot of people don't. I mean,
All
you
right.
have you have basically, last week or the week before, Brandon Johnson, yeah, it was last week, Brandon Johnson, the mayor, said, well, we don't need Trump and his National Guard and federal law enforcement in there. I mean, they have to. I mean, I call them the Laurel and Hardy show, Pritzker and Brandon Johnson, the Laurel and Hardy show of 2025, because just everything they're saying is so off base. And that, I mean, you look at him, you look at JB Pritzker, I think it was over the weekend, that said, oh, well, crime's out of control in big cities. It's okay. But it has to, I mean, Chicago's been a disaster for
Yeah.
decades.
Well, just going back to the National Guard being in Washington, um, is the lesson then that we're learning is that these police forces are understaffed and simply just adding more officers, more bodies on the ground will allow them to be more effective?
No, because they've had federal funding for decades and the crime has continued. Okay,
Well,
so
that's
if
different.
they get federal funding for hiring more police officers,
Okay.
they put the money someplace else. A lot of these major cities, and I don't want to call it a blue thing or a red thing. There's crime. There's Republican states have a greater crime rate, a larger crime rate than Democrat, Democrat run,
Democratic led states. Yeah.
yeah, states. But the problem is that in the Democrat, but see, you look at the Republican-led states, and the crime that's high in those cities are run by Democratic mayors.
Okay.
In the major, I mean, in the country, every large city is pretty much run by a Democrat government structure.
Generally. Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is, I mean, Brandon Johnson, made a comment. I mean, when you have the left-wing media calling him out, I mean, he thinks the solution to fighting combating crime is more affordable housing.
Okay. I
Now,
mean, it's probably a factor, but it's not going to be the
yes, you
factor.
can say that people, if they had affordable housing, wouldn't be as stressed out and stuff like that. But the problem is these are gangs in Chicago. I mean,
Yes.
you know it. You and I've discussed Chicago before. I mean, they keep throwing money at a problem and the money gets mismanaged. They put money in, they give federal funding for crime prevention and they give it to these organizations, but nothing really happens. It just keeps going on and on and on and on.
So what do you think then? So this is what I'm trying to get at. If putting the National Guard there has is going to decrease crime, what could be done without using federal troops? Like what other methods of reducing the crime are possible? Because it seems to me like maybe we need a federal police force then, and we add them wherever they're apparently needed. Because the
Well,
Guard themselves are not necessarily trained for it. They don't have the best equipment for it either. Uh, people aren't think when people see them, they're not thinking, "Oh, I should go to this person for help." So to me,
well, you
I'm trying to
also
figure
don't
out
want, you
how do
also
we how,
don't, you also the perception of the National Guard. They're there. Their appearance will prevent crime or push crime to another area, if you understand what I'm saying. But, you also don't want to have 18 and 19 and 20-year-old kids standing on the streets of Chicago or the streets of New York with M16s,
right?
or M4s. That could lead to a catastrophe. But the problem is instead of my best solution for combating this crime problem is every one of these governors should get together with the president. I mean, the president is out to protect the American citizens. The other people are not. The governors of these states are not here to protect people. Um, they should get together and they should start working out a plan of doing this to combat crime, not asking the federal government for more money. Let's work together. We can give money, we can put money into it, but we can also come up with some alternative to putting more police officers in there. Now, technically, we do have federal law enforcement agencies such as the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration,
Marshals,
yeah, the marshals, the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, Custom and Border Patrol, Immigration Customs Enforcement Removal I mean, there's a variety of federal law enforcement agencies that they can put in. Now, these governors cannot stop them. Trump could surge 5,000 ATF agents from around the country into Chicago, and they cannot do anything about it.
okay.
Okay. They can do the same thing with Immigration Customs Enforcement. Now, a governor has to say with the National Guard troops in his state. Okay, unless there's a rebellion, federal property is getting damaged, or there's an insurrection. And this is where the Democrats don't understand. Everything's bad about Trump, the derangement syndrome, all this. They're going to protest. They're lining up now in Chicago to do protests. That's a rebellion. They're bringing ICE in to do a mass.
Well, no, because we have the right to protest. That's a guaranteed amendment, and
No, but you have
that's
you
in the
have
Bill
you
of
have House
Rights.
members saying we must obstruct the operations that are going on. That's not protesting. Obstruction of justice is a crime. So
Okay,
if
but
you're
does
gonna put, they're gonna what Trump is gonna do is he's gonna bring immigration customs enforcement in there. He's gonna bring marshals in there. They're gonna crack down on the illegal immigration that's there, where the residents of Chicago for the past 3.5, 4 years have been up in arms about the amount of immigrants that have come in. But here's what's going to happen. These people are going to go against ICE. They're going to block them. They're going to throw rocks at them. That's a rebellion. Then Trump has the right to federalize the state's National Guard troops.
so I don't think that it's going to get to that point. I mean, because scuffles with police doesn't necessarily qualify as rebellion. You need to take up arms and be organized. But the other aspect of it is bringing ICE in. I know that the president's wanted to do that in just about every city across the country,
Right.
but I don't see how that's going to bring down the gang violence when so much of the gang violence is from the people who live in the south side of Chicago. So my point, coming back to it, like, okay, even if we do get a temporary drop with the National Guard there, how do we sustain that?
I really don't know what, I mean, I'm not trying to, I'm not a law enforcement
Expert.
official. I'm not, but once you remove so many criminals off the street, crime will start to go down.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if their systems are already overburdened, if their court systems are already, backed up, if they don't have DAs that want to aggressively prosecute, if they don't have enough, what do you call that, lawyers to appoint, then we're just going to run into the same kind of problems where it's going to be a bottleneck. So I'm thinking, instead of overhauling the system, how do we find out what pieces need to be fixed or given more resources, the appropriate resources, not just cash that can be misappropriated, to make sure that this can actually be successful.
Well, you got to make things you got to change what's going on in this country right now is really wrong. I mean, we are so divided, this nation, that everybody's against Trump, every Democrat's against Trump. They can't even govern together. So how can something be fixed? I mean, you understand what I'm trying to say? You had Trump, for example, in California. Trump went out there after the wildfires and said, issue the permits right away to rebuild homes. I mean, this is off the subject of crime, but the point
Yeah.
was you had Mayor Bass say, well, we'll get to it. We'll get him out in a week. No, you issue them now. I remember Trump sitting at that press conference, and still people haven't gotten permits to build their house. Meanwhile, they cleared all the federal permits for things, but they can't get permits. And now they want to build affordable housing in these areas. But anyway, getting back to the crime, you have to, you're going to have to basically, everybody's got to work together and you have to hire more police officers. This defund the police, which, we all know what happened there.
Yeah, it gained
And
some traction and then didn't work.
yeah, and all these, progressive prosecutors, and we need to stop looking at criminals as victims of something. And that's what's happening here. I mean, I mean, it's true. You can check bail statistics and, release records. There are people that are charged with murder. They
And
go
then
to
get
court,
bailed.
they get released. There's no, the no cash bail. You're either detained or you're released. So if you don't have any history of not showing up or failure to appear, they're going to release you. I
Okay.
mean, it's just
Even
like,
for So is the answer then like some kind of maybe national standard for these things? Do we want that, or do we want, because one of the benefits of living in a federal system is that the states have their rights and they get to determine how they want to do things. So the question then becomes, at which point do you say, okay, well, you're no longer serving your constituents properly. We need to come in and do it for you.
well, that's what's happening right now in Chicago. All the residents want help. And, Brandon Johnson, the mayor, and JB Pritzker are just like blowing them off. I mean, people need to understand, and this goes back to what I was saying months ago. The Democrats have promised things for everybody and never delivered. Okay. And, you have, they just never delivered. And they're taking away things from people to support, legal migrants that are gang members and everything else. They have to be able to govern together. And then we can start correcting the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is a business, just like any other thing is.
Yeah.
It, it's billions and billions of dollars a year. I mean, if you really look at grants that are given to local law enforcement agencies, how much does that really go to hire police officers or combat crime? Think
Right. And
about
how much of it is going to, consultants and
it.
independent review boards or whatever? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think the only solution we have right now is, I mean, am I agreeing with Trump sending National Guard troops in? No, but something has to be done.
Right.
And these mayors and governors and House representatives are making it easier for Trump because they're fighting him tooth and nail. Okay, they're fighting him, so that gives him the right to federalize those National Guard troops from that state and put them in there like he did in Los Angeles.
So that was highly controversial, and there's still arguments, legal arguments, about whether or not he appropriately used the acts of Congress to do that. So this is one of the features of this presidency is taking statutes that are rarely used and then applying them in cases where, sometimes it's controversial. So I don't know if that's going to stand, though. That I mean, if some of these go to the Supreme Court and they decide on the side of the states, then that takes all of the bite out of all this. So it's, to me, I think it's still undecided as to whether or not he really has the authority to do that under, well, at least under the statutes as they are written and have been applied previously.
Well, you got to look at one thing. Every state has federal property in it.
Yeah.
Okay. And at any time, Trump can federalize that state's National Guard to protect that federal property, which he did in Los Angeles. There was no cases where National Guard troops or the military that they put in conducted any kind of law enforcement,
Operations.
yeah,
Yeah.
operations there. They basically just protected ICE officers, protected the federal property, and that. Now you had what's his face, the circuit judge out there saying it was illegal this week. I think it was, he came down with a ruling
Yeah.
yesterday. So I mean, but would that ruling had taken place if it wasn't Trump?
I think with the National Guard, it's always been a touchy issue ever since the '60s. When there were some the incidents. So I think Americans in general are just very reluctant to call the Guard out for civil issues. Um, and it's understandable why. But that also may have kind of colored the way that the Guard has been used since then because of those perceptions. My question is just, what did they accomplish in LA other than, protecting federal property? And also, what does that actually mean? Does that mean within a mile of it, within 20 feet of it? We have these kind of vague terms that we use, and from my point of view, I'm like, they need to be measurable. We need to be able to say whether or not that constitutes protecting, that doesn't. It needs to be a little bit more black and white.
Well, you have
Uh,
to find out what the actual statutes are for that. Like, for example, with the drug-free school zones that are in effect throughout the country in different states, it's a
yeah.
thousand feet from any school, but it's not a thousand feet from the school building. It's a thousand feet from any point of the boundaries of that property.
Okay.
All right. So if you have a school that's on 100 acres or 30 acres, it's from the boundaries of that property, it's 1,000 feet. And, that was another thing that was brought up, which was the liberals were standing. Well, in a major city, everybody,
Is
every
within that.
property
Yeah.
line overlaps that 1,000 feet and 500 feet of a public housing project. Look, the bottom line is something has to be corrected here. The crime is out of control. Okay. I do crime reporting. I get all them in. I look at
Yeah.
everything. And I'm telling you, like I said to you last time, I used to walk through areas not scared. Now I look over my shoulder when I go through some areas because you don't know what's lurking, who's coming up behind you or whatever. So, I mean, not that I can handle
Petrified or
myself, but
paranoid, but yeah.
yeah, I'm not trying to be paranoid, but the point is you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't understand why everybody's fighting. I mean, I'm starting to go off on my usual tangent, but the government has to work together and get this thing accomplished. We need to bring these troops in. Why? I mean, why? Here's a perfect example. Why are Democrats protecting criminal illegal migrants? Why are they protecting them?
Yeah. It is kind of I don't, I should say, I think from their perspective, they're not thinking that they're protecting criminals. They're thinking that they're just opposing Trump's policies. So I don't even think that it's like there's not a self-awareness of this.
Well, it's also could be because they're protecting their future voter base too. That's another thing that you can,
Criminals don't vote.
well, I'm not saying all of them are criminals, but the bottom line is that a majority of them are. I mean, why are they stopping, planes from taking criminal migrants back home? Why are they doing every time? I mean, it's the bottom line is you're right. It's everything bad Trump, everything's no
Yeah,
good. And that's where we're at. But I mean, it's going to be interesting over the next couple of months because he's going in at Great Lakes Military Base right now. There's federal officers amassing there to come into Chicago. They're not
yeah,
National Guard troops, but they're U.S. Marshals, Immigration Customs Enforcement. And I think what's going to happen, and I really can't blame President Trump, is they're going to put people in there. They're going to come into the cities. They're going to start rounding up criminal illegal migrants. And yes, there's going to be migrants that are caught up in it that were not here legally. But you have to look at when you come across that border and you don't do the right thing, you're breaking the law. They're what they're going to do is they're going to make it easy. They don't think they're going to go out there. They're going to throw rocks at ICE. They're going to, you know, fire guns at them, possibly like they did in Los Angeles, that one guy. And what's going to happen is Trump's going to federalize the troops. I said this before earlier in the,
yeah.
in the broadcast, and they're going to put them in. There's nothing they can do then. You can run to court. You're not going to get an emergency. You can get an emergency thing, but it's still going to take 3 or 4 days. That's basically where we're at. The system has to. It's the same thing with anything with the government. Immigration studies, think tanks. We're going to combat crime. We're going to do this. Somebody needs
Yeah.
to really sit down and put their heads together, a bunch of people, and come up with a plan. All right. Is the criminal justice system fair? No. There's a lot of innocent people that are imprisoned. Okay.
Or
But
serving longer times than they need
than
to.
they should have. Right, exactly. But the point is there has to be a balancing act with everything. Okay. I mean, go back to Bill Clinton. He signed the largest criminal reform act that anybody ever signed, any other president. Hired troops across, 500,000 police officers across the nation, put money into that. I mean, how come there was no problem there?
Yeah.
So.
All right. So closing thoughts. You're correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not necessarily in favor of the National Guard being the ones that are chosen to go into these cities, but you feel that some sort of federal enforcement or augmentation of these city forces is necessary.
Right. Listen, I grew up in the 60s. I remember the riots in 68 and all that. I remember the army jeeps all the way down the roads on both sides. I'm not for the National Guard. Okay. I don't think it's going to be, I think there could be problems in big cities such as Chicago and New York. All right. I mean, during the riots, in Newark, New Jersey, they were taking pot shots at National Guard officers. Okay. So
Yeah.
I don't, I don't think it's a good idea to bring them in. You're going to have young kids there that are going to have guns, and it's like lighting a match to a fuse. I think something's going to happen. But do I agree with what Trump's doing by putting federal officers in there, FBI agents, DEA? Yes, I do. Something has to give. So I mean, there's children that are 2 and 3 and 5 years old that are getting killed whether it was in Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, I mean, Plainfield, New Jersey, it could be anywhere. You know, something's got to be done. We have to weigh things out. You commit a crime, you do your time. That's how I look at it. I mean,
Well, Art, I it's a classic saying, and I think we can all agree with that. Though I suspect that there were some people that will challenge that in court just because they think Trump made it up. Uh,
right. Yeah, exactly.
anyway, that's our time here at Englebrook Independent Political Views. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time, and as always, don't forget to subscribe.